Exhaustible resource, we are already importing 20%. Oil and natural gas, 75% we have to import. It's not sustainable from an energy security perspective, and it's not going to generate the kind of electricity that is needed to cover this population completely. Responsible nuclear, we have to do. And if you look at alternate energy, and I picked some statistics on this, India is only 3% of total energy is coming from nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, other alternative energy. UK, US, Germany, 10%. New Zealand, 30% because of their water resources. They generate hydroelectricity. Sweden is 50%. Again, water. So combination of, if you don't have the natural resource that much, nuclear energy is the answer. And we need to move in that direction. So India tomorrow has to have strong nuclear energy component. I think we made some progress. In the last few years, we joined the nuclear club. All of you would have seen that. I think the US helped achieve that. But now we have to turn that promise into reality by actually generating electricity. Water supply. It's expected that in any reasonable situation, every citizen of the country should have at least 20 liters of pure and clean drinking water per day. There are various statistics, but it's a reality that at least 30 to 40% of Indians don't have access to clean water. And this gets further complicated when you move out from the city and move into rural areas where you don't have the investments, in filtration and purification, etc. Again, talking about water supply, and to take the example of my mother, who's coming regularly, even in the center of Delhi, she gets water twice a day, 1 hour, and this is a very nice colony in Delhi. They have to pump the water into the tank and store it for use during the day. She cannot drink that water. She has to buy the bottles of water separately. I think water supply is an area where we need tremendous innovation and investment. Similarly, if you think about irrigation, because you would expect for a country of our size and population, we have made dramatic improvements. We have heard of the Green Revolution, which happened in the 70s. We heard of the White Revolution for milk. And I think that's helped us, come this far. But if you talk about this growing population, if you talk about that huge proportion of people below the poverty line, and if you talk about the future, we really want strong agriculture. We need irrigation to dramatically improve. Again, if you look at it from a statistic perspective, India has about 1,000 cubic meters of fresh water regeneratable per capita. Thailand is 3,000. New Zealand is 70,000. Israel and other desert countries are 100. But I make a point here. When you look at the irrigated land as percentage of agricultural land, Israel and India same, because they have developed extraordinary technology of drip irrigation to use less water to be able to grow the plants. We need to move vigorously in those directions to be able to drive the technology where we can have clean water supply and we can have irrigation to support a strong agriculture. We need innovative breakthroughs on these areas, and people are working on these, but I think it's critical. Sanitation. This actually, even as I speak this long list of items, is one item which actually makes me feel worst even to say it. 50% of India's population does not have access to toilets. More than 650 million people don't have access to toilets. And also a sad part of this statistic, this has been increasing, this percentage, over the last 15-20 years, which shows that we need to think about the focus of development from the point of view of tomorrow. Linked to the food, linked to the water supply, linked to this sanitation, are the following results. UNICEF data shows 45% of Indian children below 5 years old are what they technically define as malnutrition. Their weight is less than what they should be at that age. Infant mortality, children who die right after they are born, 43 per 1,000 births, versus Thailand is 10, developed countries is 3. Part of this, healthcare, the expenditure per capita, public expenditure on healthcare is 4 to 5% of GDP. All the countries we considered as developed have 10% of GDP at least. And to set right the situation and then bring it to stable, we actually need to be more than 10% for some time to bring things to par on this subject. And to look at it from another perspective, the amount that an average Indian spends every year on health is $60. Thailand is $215. The developed countries, $3,000 to $10,000. This shows how much we have to catch up. You know, we talk about medical tourism and it becomes popular in India, but I think I tried to lift the veil a little bit, that we have to look at about access of healthcare and the quality and quantity of that healthcare for 1.3 billion people, and not only the tourists. And how do we do that? Education. I think we're very proud, rightly so, of IIT and IIM. In fact, I am from IIM Bangalore. And in fact, whenever we talk about institutions, people around the world will respect some of these institutions, some of the universities. Khonajan here is from Miranda House, which is very respected, college in Delhi. But on the other hand, we have to keep the following in mind. Our literacy rate today is 75%. Anybody in the world, developed countries, 100%. Basic literacy. So 25% of our population not literate. And remember, 30% of our population is age 0 to 14. This is the future. So we need to start moving on primary education. It is a fundamental right. There was a recent amendment to our constitution where education has been made a fundamental right of every citizen. So the intention of the government is there. The question is how to execute. The quality of public education is very poor. Compared to what I see and I admire, for example, in Thailand, leave alone any other countries, when we see the public education which is being supported by the government here, when you simply see even the structure of those schools, the nature of the teachers, the uniforms of the children, is so beautiful. How can we replicate that in India? Is how we have to think. Secondary and tertiary education, very, very difficult from the point of view of supply, because we cite the examples which I quoted earlier as being proud institutions, but compared to the population of people coming out of the secondary system, right now the availability of tertiary education is only 20%. We need huge investments in education. One of the things which I believe will happen, and some of you may have studied, some disruptive techniques are coming in education. Maybe it's not possible to have teacher with school, with infrastructure in every village, but you could have virtual classroom. You can have one teacher in a district location, and you could have the screen, and you could have some interactive terminals where the students are having the classes, but you can achieve that low cost and scalable. Some models are starting to happen. I believe this will happen tomorrow, and this will be disruptive, and this will move the needle on education. English continues to have been a strength which has helped us in all this progress. We should try and keep that even as we devote rightfully energy to all our own languages. And in fact, when I speak at other forums, people ask me about maybe with ASEAN, what can we think about in Thailand? I say, many people in Thailand know English, but they don't feel confident to speak. They're humble. I think we have to make them feel comfortable to speak so that they can go out there and do business and integrate with the world. But that's a strength that we have, which we should continue developing from the point of view of education. Tourism. Thailand has at least 27 million tourists coming every year. What they call the FTA, the arrivals, foreign travel arrivals. You will be surprised to know India is still less than 10 million. And if you look at what India has to offer, if you look from the Himalayas at the north, if you look at the beaches of Goa or South India, if you look at the forests that we have, if you have the natural reserves that we have, if you look at the architecture, the temples, the living temples, Ajanta, Ellora, I mean, I'm just naming a few. I mean, there's history and culture in every corner and every district. We have not mobilized to receive tourism. I don't think people feel safe and secure enough when they come to India, when they're traveling as tourists. The amount of lodging of different economic standard, which reasonable cost can travel as a tourist, is not there. In fact, I remember a very interesting personal episode. I had gone to Scotland once, and we did this major bus trip where we go to Loch Ness. Some of you may have gone. They talk about the monster which doesn't exist, and then they show us a castle. In fact, I remember the name. I think it was called Urquhart Castle, and it's broken down castle. And they say this lord was here at this time. You know what? Near my mother's house is actually broken down fort of Prithviraj Chauhan, who was a famous king with a long history, who was born before this Lord Urquhart. But no tourist goes there. Almost as if nobody knows about it. We need to learn from Thailand in particular. How can we receive tourists properly and share our culture, share our history, and when the tourism grows, we know the proportion of GDP it can contribute and the job it can generate and how many people can be involved. And we talked about earlier that the sharing of culture builds the bonds. This is an area certainly we can and we should learn, including from Thailand. Sports. I don't know how many of you know cricket. The background actually is India, until independence, there was no real access of good sporting facilities to average Indians, not existent. Whatever limited amount of facilities were there were being used by colonial rulers, very few privileged Indians. In the process of nation building, with so many other challenges, there was not so much investment on sporting infrastructure because other priorities were very high. Also, in India, very difficult to conceive that one can make career as a sportsman. So until recently, when cricket became so commercially popular, everybody has what you call real job and may represent the country in athletic or in cricket because they work on that in the free time. Is not professional athletes. Was never think like that because people saying get a degree, work because there's no infrastructure. People don't even think about this. It's changing now. We used to be very good at field hockey, but as the game became more physical and the rules also changed, as it became a global game, the fitness required and the training required to play that game, we also lost the standard. In fact, we feel very happy, which is unfortunate, that when Olympics happen, our country of 1.3 billion people, if we get one bronze medal also, we are happy. I think this itself is pointing out what we need to do from the point of view of building and infrastructure. The good news there is, apart from cricket, people are starting to invest, in hockey, in soccer. One is starting to see good young talent, like you have Khun Ratchanok here, whom I support. If not playing against India, I always support her. You're world champion. We have more and more individual talent starting to come. We need to do more because I think the company that works hard and plays hard, the country that works hard and plays hard, actually has a strong soul also. And it's part of development and looking tomorrow. Research and development. I think this is a very important area for us to think about. And one way of looking at it is, let's look at Nobel Prize. I can recite to you all the Nobel Prize winners including some because of association with India, even though they left India a long time ago. But you say Sir C.V. Raman, Sir Rabindranath Tagore, you have Hargobind Khurana, for his work on DNA. You have Professor Amartya Sen, Professor Bhagwati, maybe one or two more. This is over our independent India span of 70 to 80 years. We have this many Nobel Prize winners. If you do the research, I saw all developed countries spending on research and development, apart from education, which I said is double of GDP, they're spending 2 to 3 to 4% of GDP on research and development. India statistic in decimal places, which I think getting rounded to 0. We need that investment in research and development. We need it not only for industrial scale, but we need it to create the innovative solutions which will solve the issues which I discussed previously. Let me give you a few examples, from the point of view of innovation. Very recently, I saw a beautiful video. There's an Indian scientist in Stanford. He has laboratory there. One of the reasons malaria is still a problem in Africa and some other places in the world is because to diagnose malaria, you need microscope. You take the blood test, you put it on the glass, but you need microscope. Microscope, expensive, fragile, difficult to travel. So in the heartland of Africa, no testing for malaria. What this man and his group have done, this scientist in Stanford, they prepare a microscope for $1, which is flat cardboard, which you can make. It has the model, you can make like this, and it becomes a microscope. He also shows you can put it under the foot, don't break. With this technology, they got some support from institutions. They spent 30,000 microscopes to Africa. That's the disruptive research and development which can change the trajectory of a country like India. I also read recently in India, somebody has developed a very special application on mobile phone where farmers can get the price, of the products, and they're able to realize 50% of the value of the last selling price compared to what they used to get 10 to 20% earlier because they have better information. This is the disruptive cheap technology which is going to improve our life. I have said all this. But is it utopia that I expect that we can move forward and solve all these problems? No, I don't think so. I have some specific suggestions. The first issue that always comes is where will you have the resources? When I keep saying you need to increase percentage of GDP for health, for education, for sanitation, for R&D, but where will you take it away from? How do you create this resource? It's very, very interesting. We have an untapped resource. This untapped resource is the unaccounted income in the country, what we call black money. Now, the range of estimates, because obviously this is not statistical or anybody measure properly, the range of estimate of unaccounted income of GDP ranges from 10 to 50%. But some academics have argued that it's 40-50% in Latin America and Africa, maybe around 25% in a country like India. If you take 25% of our GDP, that's $450 billion in a year. If you take 10%, which is the effective taxation rate of GDP, that's $45 billion. We generate 2.5% of GDP if you're able to bring that into the system. If you look at the accumulated black money, some of you may know the estimate of Indian private gold holdings is 15,000 to 30,000 tons. The value is somewhere between 700 billion to 1.4 trillion dollars. And this is just sitting in people's homes. This is just sitting in people's homes, not a productive asset. Take a moment here to welcome Kun Ambassador. let me continue with your permission. Yeah. Oh, yes, wait a second. Thank you. So I think just to summarize, I think for Khun Ambassador, what we have talked about is, a kind of the description of India today, coming from the experiences of my own family, starting from the 13th century, globalization, urbanization, digitization, all the big figures that we talk about India and the progress that we have made and the pride that we should have in that, considering the kind of events we had in 47 and 91. Our culture, the connections, the history, and we talked then about many challenges that we face in terms of healthcare, sanitation, infant mortality, irrigation, R&D, so a set of subjects. And I think we just moved to discussing that there are solutions and it's not, utopian. And I think from that point, I'll just catch up again so that, we can re-summarize quickly. So the question I think which we said, where can we find the resources to fund this? Because we talked about so many percentage of GDP we have to multiply. In education we have to go from 5 to 10%. Healthcare we have to go, again multiply by 5 to 10 to 15% if you want to catch up with the kind of healthcare that we need. Research and development we have to take, to at least 3%, which is what you see in developed countries and for disruptive innovation technology. And I think the key solutions there, number one, 10 to 50% may be a broad range, but 25% if we take as the estimate of unaccounted income in our economy, we are talking per annum $450 billion US. If you take our 10% effective tax rate which exists today, we are talking $45 billion or 2.5% of GDP. How to bring that into the mainstream? We talked about the assets which are lying idle. Gold, 15,000 to 30,000 tons, $700 million to $1.4 trillion lying in people's homes, not putting to work in the economy. The availability of, overseas assets which people are believed to have taken out of India in the last many years, there are many estimates, but including some semi-official estimates, $500 billion to $1.5 trillion. How can we bring that back? I see that to be able to generate these resources, we need a combination of amnesty, deterrence, better compliance, and also an environment which prevents the generation of fresh black money, which we'll talk about. The other related issue is we have to move to direct transfer of support to less privileged people. There are many estimates again, but the feeling is that when we try and support the poor people, if you start with 100 rupees, the feeling is that maybe because of leakage in the system, what reaches the ultimate beneficiary could be 30 rupees or 40 rupees. It's a range of estimates. We have started now having a concept called a universal identifier. We have a project called the UIDI. We have started doing direct transfer of subsidies to people. But here is the vision that I have, and I think Reverend Guruji had mentioned that people are of equal status. So every person should have the same right for education, for health, based on merit and based on the gravity of the situation, and not based on their income level. The way I see it from a solution perspective is, you have a universal identifier, you have a strong taxation system which is also on the system. We are able to classify people based on income levels 1, 2 and 3. You go to that hospital, if your income level 1, automatically you will be charged a higher amount. If your income level 5, you will not be charged, or you will be charged a very small amount. And there will be a cross subsidy, and there will also be a direct subsidy from the government in terms of healthcare, where you know that the treatment has happened and you have paid for it. But we need such disruptive thinking, and we need to make that happen quickly to release the potential of what is the assets and the income being generated in the economy, which is not coming back to put to work for what we need it to work. There are many examples of individual enterprise and public enterprise, how people do this. Some of you may have heard of, the Arvind Netralaya, where they do high quality cataract operations. They charge something from people who have good income, but they try and do it free for the poor people. And it's hygienic, it's world class. Very recently, in fact, good friend of mine who used to be here, he's gone as the head of an Indian public sector company called Energy Efficiency in India. He has working out tripartite agreements where with governments in the states, they're putting the LED where you use 1/10 the energy for the same light. It's costly, but the savings in terms of subsidy, etc., make it commercially viable. We need much more of these public-private type of partnerships. We need parity of private and public sector quality and compensation. I believe very strongly in this. In fact, we could call it the Singapore model. Officers, police, government officers, police, defense, healthcare, education in the government sector, they need to be paid same based on their qualifications and their merit as anybody is in the private sector. The quality of the institution in the government sector should be identical and competing with the quality of the institution in the private sector. This requires the unlocking of those resources. This requires complete transparency, but you have to remove these roots of differences which generate the problems which create the unaccounted income. We need to incentivize for efficiency and productivity. Like we do in private sector, same in public sector. So if somebody is doing a great job, need to incentivize them. Needs to be on a level playing field. And this is necessary to ensure that the people who are paying either through a cross subsidy or a consumption tax, if they are paying for the next generations or if they are paying for those who are less advantaged, they believe that the money is being used fully and transparently for the benefit of all. Inflation, it's very interesting. In a world of low inflation, India has been suffering from pretty high inflation. And by definition, it would touch, those malnutrition children that we talked about. It would touch the below the poverty line people, large numbers of people that we talked about. We need to unlock supply side, improve efficiency, reduce wastage, reduce losses. If we do that, we will have a tremendous improvement in inflation. This has to do with the previous point. Public and private have to work together to reduce the losses, the transmission losses, the loss of grains in storage, so that we have more efficiency and less losses. That throughput itself will help. We need, I think, the government to take a commanding role in the areas that we talked about, which needs the leadership from the public sector, which is the security, the education, the healthcare, the sanitation, the irrigation, and really prioritize that and vacate business with easy and transparent rules for the private sector. This will, I think, allow also for a clear focus to allow that core infrastructure and that social development to happen. If you're wondering that their banker, is talking so much, about the social side in this speech about India today and tomorrow, I honestly believe that if you create the system and conditions of the type that I described, trade, GDP, FDI will chase it. Because if you have a system which is transparent, if the ease of doing business in India is we become top 3 country, if our people are healthy and happy, if everybody has got education, that's going to drive all that we are looking for from the point of view of the traditional economic metrics, and more than enough opportunity for everybody, including the bankers. Defense, we spend 2.5% of GDP. Can we help to make, a better relations with our neighbors and our position in the world, so that we can reduce that to 1.5%, which is what a lot of the developed countries have? That will release 1% of GDP. All this requires, actually, you might say, pretty selfless approach. A lot of people have to think a little selflessly, even though when I said from the point of view of equating the public and private sector, from the point of view of compensation, etc., I'm being very realistic, that it's not purely altruistic, but there needs to be a greater mission. And I think we spoke about that today, in Reverend Guruji's lecture also, that you need to talk about balance and well-being even as you're developing. Now, along with that, I think you need gratitude from those who are better off, gratitude which leads to happiness and leads to wanting to share,